There's two things in this world humans weren't meant to do: flying and being out in the open water. I mean, yes, we do have technology in order to bypass our species' shortcomings, and we have made it out into space, which I always find fascinating considering nothing is supposed to be out there concerning evolving in the vacuum of space. It's full of radiation and certain doom is merely just a whole breach away. Yet we still prefer space over exploring our own oceans. And honestly, I can't blame us for that either, because the ocean is just straight up nightmare fuel. But speaking of that nightmare fuel, that's today's topic. Out in the open ocean, a doctorate student is being sent there on a fishing trawler in order to capture information on the patterns of the faunal creatures of the ocean. Why would anyone choose this? I'm sure I don't know, because even in the biology world, marine biologists are considered fairly unique. Anyways, as they begin hopefully not their doomed adventure, as everyone remarks it's bad luck to bring a redhead on board, so it's off to a great start, their boat eventually gets grabbed by something unseen below the surface. Eventually it becomes clear it's capable of infecting the crewmates, changing their behavior before ultimately leading to a grisly fate. So in today's episode, we will talk about what the parasite does to the human body, why it chooses what it does concerning infection sites, and where this thing even came from. Alright, so for all those new here, because actually I think I've recovered from what I would call a dark suspension, because if you use those two words and then find their synonyms on YouTube, you'll know what I'm saying. And because of that, if you would like to check if you are still subscribed to the channel, because after going through that shadow period, I'll tell you, man, this channel got kicked in the crotch. Anyways, up on screen you'll see a timestamp. If you want to bypass the summary, you can go straight into the discussion of the parasite, and there. For all others, let's talk about sea fever. I believe there's horrible things in the ocean, and that was pretty bad. But well, we'll start off our story with me feeling really bad for the people who made this movie. Dust appears to have backed it, and A, the movie itself was actually pretty good, and B, they had a release date of April 2020 right after the whole planet shut down, so talk about bad luck and timing. But it appears that this was supposed to be some sort of like viewing event, like documentary style or something. Either way, they got screwed to the wall on release of this, so poor Scots. Anyhow, we see my absolute nightmare being in the water with dark water below and someone falling in. Bro, no thanks. A woman falls in and we get some random footage of Cnidarians. As a group in what appears to be a well-funded lab, which I have to ask, where is this sort of like backed laboratory? Because last I recall, marine biologists are typically working out of boxes with most basic tools. Because even me, as a microbiologist, they gave us just a couple of sticks and a rock to figure out what certain microbes were ransacking people's guts, and we had to share the rock. But a professor walks in and asks Siobhan why she's not hanging out with the rest of the nerds behind her. She says that she doesn't do hangouts. So I just break off for a second. Let me hit you with a bit of knowledge. If you are amongst your peers as a scientist and you can't find common ground in which to build any friendship with them, you're probably a bit of a douche canoe. Just saying. I've met some people like that in the lab, and man, they are really just a nice bit of sand and gravel thrown into a well-functioning machine. Complaining aside, the professor tells her she needs to wrap up her doctorate by going into the field and gathering evidence of her claims. She says that she can just do that from the computer, but he reminds her that if she doesn't, she's going to fail out of her doctorate, and there's really nothing he can do to help her. As she gets on the boat, we see that her social skills are a bit subpar, but can I blame her? No, I can't, because it's not like I'm really undefeated in the social parking lot. We also see that she's a little apprehensive about getting on the boat, and she may be a bit freaked out by the ocean, which actually, it's common for people to go into fields that scare them to learn about what they are afraid of. For instance, I'm a bit of a hypochondriac, yet I chose to go in the field of diseases. Pretty interesting how the human brain works, isn't it? And we now meet Gerard and Freya, who own and sail the boat. Amit is an engineer down below deck, and Sudi is the other guy helping him. Freya asks Siobhan what she's supposed to do there, and she's looking for anomalies in their catch to develop an algorithm to predict ecological outcomes. But also she has to do a dive in the open ocean, which can nope. But we see some info that apparently fishermen don't learn to swim, as it's better to go quick rather than slow. So I guess story time. There's a concept of human hope, and it's pretty profound. There's a story about a ship full of sailors that went down. I can't remember if it was like World War II or not, but they all got separated out. Some of them knew help was coming and others had no clue. As they drifted apart, those that apparently didn't know drowned in a few hours. Those who did know that help was actually on the way were able to swim for just about 16 hours until finally being rescued. The point is, learn to swim, because if you are able to call for help, you'll be able to push yourself. Going fast is not the vibe. As Siobhan takes off her hat, we also see that she's a redhead, which if I remember correctly, like the whole crew is like, oh god. But the superstitions among sailors was that it was bad luck to bring women in general on board of a boat. But their captain is also a woman, so who cares about redheads? I mean, you can't just pick and choose your superstitions, man. Sudi is having a bro moment about this, but Johnny is interested in Siobhan, so he really doesn't care. But he does tell her to put her hat back on, so now they're heading off to go make some bank. Siobhan is shown the bunk room and told that they will work in shifts and get 2 hours of sleep, which concerns her because, scientists. She says that'll affect their brain, cause emotional outbursts, and can even lead to psychosis, to which Johnny says, yeah, I know, it's great, and that also just sounds like a regular Tuesday at my house. He refers to it, though, as sea fever, and look, there's the title. As Freya and Jared check the fishing report, apparently there's a ton out there. Meanwhile, back down in the ship, Siobhan puts her foot in her mouth, as you do, with Omid, as she compliments his work on the engineering of the boat and asks, why doesn't he have a better job? There's that socialization ability just shining through. He says that he's looking, he just hasn't had the right opportunity yet to get off the boat and get another engineering job. As Freya calls back to the Coast Guard, they see there's an exclusion zone. Jared confirms that that's where their fish are smack in the middle of. Freya tries to sneak it by the Coast Guard, say, oh, we'll just go through it and not fish, promise. But that gets shut down as whales and calves are all over the place, so they are banned from even entering the area. So I wonder what will happen. She agrees to go around it, but Jared has other ideas. That night, as they continue on their voyage, Siobhan goes to sit in the dining area to work, and even is being offered the chance to sit with everybody, but she instead says no, and goes and sits in bed alone. She's on that Sigma female grind set. We now get the montage of her working outside at night, collecting info, waking up the crew in the middle of the night with her 10 million lumen LED flashlight, the usual. A few days later, a bunch of whales and dolphins can be seen on the starboard side, which concerns Siobhan as typically whales and dolphins avoid fishing lanes as there's too much noise. Jared at this point sees something on the radar which quickly gets under them and the boat is stopped, breaking the radio in the process. Heading below deck, they can see the texture of the wood has changed, almost like it's being melted a little bit. Siobhan pokes it with a stick, here we go, and Omid tells Sudi to go and get the timber plugs. Up in the captain's nest, Freya attempts to start up the engine but it won't turn over. She looks at their location and then finds that they are in the exclusion zone pretty far. Meanwhile, Siobhan continues poking the thing with a stick and finds it leaking a blue-green material. Siobhan goes and gets a scoop of nature's jello and then puts it into a petri dish. Jared ends up pulling a bunch of wood away to reveal whatever in God's name that's supposed to be. Better hope nobody gets lonely enough, am I right? Jared tells Siobhan to do her dive and get the barnacles off the side of the ship. Heading under, she spots tentacles are attached to the side of the ship. And as she goes to cut it off, which why would you not look down to see what those things are attached to is just beyond me. Anyways, it starts bleeding. Eventually, she does look down and finds that other tentacles are floating up as they attempt to grab her, and she spots this giant pulsating thing below the surface. As she tells the crew that it's just really one huge animal and has tendrils, they're like, maybe it's the Kraken. Or we can be boring and just say it's Cnidarian, whatever. They decide to decrease the weight of the boat so the thing loses its grip, but it appears to be holding on tight. As Johnny walks past the winch though, I don't get it. Somehow his hand got stuck. No idea how, but it results in a pretty deep wound. Again, how did this happen? Siobhan then goes and grabs his wallet, which is covered in blood, not using any amount of standard precaution, but while she does it, she spots a boat near them. They fire a flare looking for help, but the other boat doesn't respond. So they call a team meeting to see who should go over. Siobhan, okay, it could be Garad, it could be Jared, it could be Gerard. I'm gonna go with Jared. And Johnny all head over to get help. Boarding the boat, they find that the radio is smashed, but Johnny says to listen as he can't hear anybody on board. He descends below, followed by everyone else, and then finds the crew. Some of them have been taken out by stabs to the chest, and it looks like one man in particular has completely had his eyes explode out of his face. Jared tells them not to mention a word of this to anyone back in the boat as not to cause a panic. He stacks it up to sea fever and one person going insane. Johnny says it's probably just birds, with the hatch closed and people having stab wounds and everything. Yes, of course. Back on the original ship, some whales begin swimming by, and then they hear a moan. The creatures let go of the ship to presumably go after a whale. Also, I don't know if you guys can hear this or not, but somebody in my neighborhood has been cutting trees, I kid you not, for 2 months at this point. And it's like, bro, how many freaking trees do you have on your property? So anyways, I hope you can't hear that. As they leave the area, Siobhan and Omid talk about what the substance is, but they can't quite figure out what it would be secreting. But they get an announcement saying something big is coming, but it turns out to just be a massive fish. A massive fish that they bring up and aren't moving. Does anybody else find that a little strange? So now everyone is jazzed as that's money that they're bringing up on the deck. As Johnny goes to pick up some fish, we see that he's more tired than usual, and that jello is dripping off the line that had cut Johnny's hand earlier. As Siobhan and Johnny talk, budding romance. Hopefully that doesn't end too soon. A little later on, Siobhan joins the squad to eat this time, as she's got a dude that she's interested in, so why not eat with everybody? She says that he looks hot, like fever hot, and he explains, oh, I just got out of a hot shower. As they discuss how Sudi almost broke the boat, Johnny gets a great idea. Let's go for a swim, which out out in the open ocean in cold water at night, probably not a great idea. They catch him stripping down on the deck and pull him back inside. They immediately begin questioning what he's on to think that was a good idea. He says that he isn't on anything and didn't bring anything on the boat. Siobhan says that it must be the fever, as clearly he's sick or something. She believes it to be an infection. His eye appears to be bothering him, so she takes a look and then sees something swimming within his eyeball, which there's a reason for that, which we'll discuss in the science portion. Johnny gets up to clean his hand as Sudi goes to take a shower. As Johnny cleans off his face, he begins retching and realizes that he's gone blind, as a bunch of creatures then burst from his eyes, causing massive blindness because basically his eyes are gone. He falls to the ground but quickly meets his end, as Siobhan now gets more blood all over her hands. She tells the crew that there were parasites in his eyes and they need to turn off the water. So here we get something really dumb. They run over to tell Sudi to turn off the water, and despite being frantic, he's like, LOL guys, nah. I'm thinking that if someone was freaking out that much and I was, over the ocean, my mind would go to, yo, is this boat sinking? I wouldn't finish my shower. But by the time they burst in and get him, the parasites have already eaten into his skin and infected Sudi. Later, as they go to check the water filter, they find that it's been completely eaten through by something. They go and then open the main tank and find parasites are stuck in there and are attempting to escape. Siobhan says those things are larvae, and a discussion begins about what to do with them. She suggests that since they're saltwater organisms, they should expire soon anyway since they are in fresh water. Jared says that they'll say a prayer for Johnny at dawn, and Omid goes to put Sudi to bed. Sudi laments as he never asked out that girl he's been talking about, which bummer bro, that's why you gotta be on that alpha Chad mindset and just go for it. I really gotta stop using Sigma and Alpha at this point. Anyways, Siobhan gets put on first watch and then falls asleep, very good, but Omid comes to wake her up and says they can go check on the creature. As they do, however, she sees none of them are moving. However, as she uses the net, it gets eaten through very quickly, indicating that there's probably one larger one in there that has been eating the others, so there are still a few left. As Siobhan goes to check on what is going on with this jello material, she sees Sudi is still bleeding, which his clotting factor should have kicked in by now. Because of this, something is still screwing with his wounds. As she looks into the slime, she sees that is definitely a video of sperm, but they're all alive and moving. She alerts the captain and skipper that the thing mistook them for likely a whale and latched on. It causes wounds and then releases parasites into the body to feast on the animal. That means the parasites can definitely enter through cuts in the skin on a person, or really just the skin in general, like in Sudi's case, because they make the cuts. They now devise that they need to get rid of the eggs and creatures in the water system. Siobhan suggests they create UV light, as these creatures are halopelagic, so UV can do a fair amount of damage to them. They attempt to make a UV light with a foam, but it has no effect on the newly spawned parasites. She says they'll be infected within 30 hours before they even make it home, and I mean, not necessarily if you're careful. Siobhan devises a plan to electrify the boat using an arc welder and seawater to conduct it. They're able to pull it off, which does in fact get rid of all the blue raspberry jello on the boat, but the creature in the water tank is still very much so alive. Everything appears pretty good now, except Sudi. As Freya cleans his wounds, he's still bleeding. Siobhan tells Freya that they can't go to land until 36 hours is up. And I have to break in here. What you do is call a quarantine team. Tell them that you are potentially infected with something that's unknown, explain the parasitic process and the symptoms, and then enter quarantine with medical personnel around. Just staying out there seems like a dumb way to go in my humble opinion. And Freya agrees, as she's not staying on board just because this nerd says so. Siobhan then goes to Omid to tell him that they need to keep everyone on the boat when they get to port. But he's got a kid, so he's like, nope. Plus Sudi is bleeding out, which as Sierra goes to him, he asks if his eyes are open or closed, so now he's gone blind as well. She attempts to calm him as he quickly meets his end and then is brought to the freezer with Johnny. Siobhan keeps singing the same song about quarantine, but the skipper and captain really aren't listening, so she decides to take things into her own hands. She grabs a rope and throws it into the propeller, stranding them at that exact spot. Omid then runs out to find what she's done. Siobhan said she disabled the boat, and then Ciara punches her in the face. Classic. She says that they need to wait the 36 hours so they can be sure, which now they're stuck anyways, so I suppose it doesn't matter. Freya now gets an idea. Look into everybody's eyes. As they go around and check, she confirms the checked ones are all good. Jared says that he hasn't been checked yet, to which she responds that she doesn't have to check him, as homeboy is already mega infected with parasites. Jared comes clean now, saying that they weren't supposed to be there in the first place, and he changed course, which led them to the whole ordeal, which I mean, how was he really supposed to know what was out there? I wouldn't call this a standard organism that they were dealing with. Also, it turns out Sierra may have been infected, as she's losing her emotional grip on things as well. But this may just be the sea fever. She ends up chasing Siobhan up the ladder, and she gets kicked off and then just lays there, meeting her end with what I believe is a broken neck. As Siobhan goes to check, yep, she's infected. Back in Freya and Jared's cabin, he pulls out a knife, basically seeking a way to end it before his eyes explode, to which Freya then just ends him with the knife. That explains what was happening on the other boat, I suppose. goes, but at this point, Freya says she's now taking an inflatable boat to the mainland. It'll take her 3 days to get there, so that'll serve as her quarantine. Either she makes it or her eyes explode. So this just leaves Omid and Siobhan. They go to check on the sealed container and hear thuds coming from within. Siobhan says that it must just be one animal, as it's now eaten all the others. She determines that it likes cold water, so if they warm it up, it'll shock the creature so they can get rid of it. As they do, however, it eats its way through the hull and escapes, kind of solving that issue. Of course, that does cause the boat to start sinking, which, as you might imagine, isn't ideal. They grab the food and then light the boat on fire to serve as a beacon for the Coast Guard. As Siobhan climbs down, Omid says that he can't swim, and again, bruh, you're on a boat. Climbing down, he falls into the water and then is pulled under by the creature. Siobhan decides to go in after him and is able to free him, as, I don't know, it does look like he can swim to me. Getting into the inflatable, they see the Coast Guard is now on their way towards them. However, Siobhan's hand had been grabbed by the creature, so now she's infected. Omid says that they will tourniquet it, which will save her life as the poison won't spread, but I don't believe that's how it works, my man. Knowing this, Siobhan does what was mentioned at the beginning. Better to go quick than slow. She dives down into the massive creature's tentacles for some reason. I mean, you wouldn't catch me doing that, and then she meets her end, probably just by straight drowning. All I'm saying is, she was way too willing to hang out with that thing, and I think she probably has a family, and like, wouldn't they want her body back? But anyways, the water's bioluminescent plankton begin lighting up as Omid signals to the Coast Guard, which, don't take my sarcastic tone for this not being a good movie. It was actually a pretty good movie. But the first thing I promise you was, what does this creature do to the human form? But yeah, you fell for it. All right, hell yeah. Anyways, that comes later in the video, because first we need to talk about where this thing came from and why Siobhan was likely sort of ridiculous for wanting to protect it. So first, a couple of clues give us some pretty good examples of this thing's exact origins on the planet, and thankfully it's extremely far from where humans would normally travel. Deep down in the ocean on the bottom of the sea floor, the reality is humans have explored very little. I think it's somewhere around like 1%. Not only is it a vast open expanse of what we would call a wasteland, but it's also dark, cold, and has crushing pressure that few vessels can actually dive to unless specifically designed to do that. Because of these factors and humanity's unwillingness to return to fish, because hey, that's gotta be a complete hell. I mean, really, imagine you're a fish, you can't see below you, and you don't know what's down. No, wolf. But we really don't have much of an idea of what may be down there. There's been plenty of examples over the course of recent years that show us when something happens, we may just not have an actual explanation. All the time we hear things in the ocean with deep sea instruments that are way out there, and we just simply don't have an understanding as to what could make that sound. Now, sometimes it's probably either the crust moving or whales singing, but that's not always the case. Anyways, own personal fear aside of the ocean, the bottom of the seafloor also inspires other horrible things. Animals that live in the environments are not only butt ugly and horrifying to look at, like think about running into an anglerfish as it comes out of the pitch black darkness, no thanks, but also have just as hostile adaptations as the environment they hail from. Being completely black to blend in with their surroundings, with sharp teeth, large eyes, or potentially even no eyes since it's not necessary, or possibly even possessing bioluminescence to draw in unsuspecting prey, these creatures are highly aggressive and swift predators, as prey is not always guaranteed to come across you in the dark depths of the ocean. So, you may not get another chance. Because of this, they have become highly skilled at taking down animals viciously around them. But there is something else you may not be aware of down there. You would think the lack of food, or at least the ability to know it's around you, the animals would be small, but the truth of the matter is, it's the complete opposite. The concept of deep sea gigantism is quite prevalent, and the potential lack of understanding of this can actually be seen in a lot of people's own thinking. So again, the anglerfish. Ask yourself, how large is that creature? What's your understanding of it were you to come across it? Well, I've got bad news. They could be up to around like 3.3 feet long, like on average, with some of the larger ones being almost 7 feet long, though that's not typical. Most people, when they think of anglerfishes, they think of like, oh, maybe it's like a foot long and it's really ugly, but the fact is, for a 7 foot long fish, your entire torso could fit in its mouth. The females are the larger of the species, but the point is, fish down there can be just as large, if not larger, than the ones on the surface. Now think about the legend of the Kraken, a giant squid-like monster that pulled ships to their doom and ate sailors like popcorn shrimp. That's actually potentially based on a species known as the colossal squid, which can weigh around 1,090 pounds and grow to a length of 30 to 45 feet. Now typically anglerfish reside around the 2.5 feet mark, but can grow to 7 feet, attributing potentially the same factors to the colossal squid, and you start to see that animals down there have the potential to grow much larger due to deep sea gigantism. Which, why is this the case? The abnormal growth and size of deep sea animals can only be explained under really two rules, that is Kleber's rule and Bergman's rule. The first rule, Kleber's rule, states that larger animals are more efficient than small animals. This theory also takes into consideration the surface area to volume ratio ratio of sea animals and the fractal nature of blood vessels. Large creatures that exist in the deep oceans normally depend on food that drops from above them. It means that there is a scarce amount of food at this level, thus deep swimming animals are more efficient and therefore become larger. The Bergman's rule, on the other hand, states that sea animals tend to increase in body size with decrease in temperature. Most of the large sea animals are typically found in colder regions, while small sea creatures are found in warm regions. For these animals, the low temperatures in their habitats lead to an increase in cell size as well as lifespan. It's obvious based on the size of the creature that it hails from the depths of the ocean and may have inadvertently been brought up to more shallow waters, which in reality would cause it to likely meet its end. But why exactly was it brought up in the first place? Well, again, we go back to the deep sea. I know it's terrible. Whales specifically have been known to surface, catch breath, and immediately dive to the darkest portions of the ocean. The reason is even whales such as sperm whales can fall victim to becoming something else as prey really that lurks within the ocean. Potentially called a leftover trait from the days of when a megalodon existed, which was a massive shark that was estimated to have likely grown between 52 to 85 feet long or 15 to 26 meters long. This thing actively hunted whales and ate them. Then it just kind of seemingly disappears. Some say it's probably still down there in the dark areas of the ocean, but likely not, as we would have found some evidence of it still being around through things like whale carcasses or sightings. Anyhow, as the whales dive, they do, however, still have a predator down there that they do regularly fight. On average, about every 15 minutes, a fight takes place between a colossal squid and a sperm whale. So often are these confrontations that we find evidence of sucker marks all over their bodies and wounds from the squid hanging on to them as the sperm whale tries to eat it. Through these interactions, while the sperm whale likely usually wins, it does not come out completely unscathed. But I want to focus on technique, the holding of prey as the squid goes after the whale and the whale goes after the squid. Cnidarians use a lot of the same techniques, just more passively. Long tendrils flow from their bodies almost completely invisible to the naked eye, which drift through the water and sting prey with specialized cells known as cnidites, utilizing nematocysts to get the job done. When stinging an animal, for smaller animals such as fish, this will immobilize them and allow them to be wrapped up and drawn into the cnidarian for sustenance. Some forms of actual box jellyfish can be lethal to humans if you are stung. Basically, these things are not fun to mess around with and will absolutely body you given the chance. So if you see them on the beach because they beach themselves, go ahead and laugh at them and poke them with a stick. Sounds cruel, but considering we now have man o' wars floating around the great state of Florida, we really need to keep an eye on these things. Anyhow, hatred of jellyfish aside, the point is it will grab onto prey and hold on, attempting to draw it in. Now, for a cnidarian this large in the deep sea, and for it to be brought up to more shallow waters, it's clear that at some point a predecessor had latched onto a whale that swam deep enough, and then it held on. Because the cnidarian will secrete its young through these tendrils, the whale was infected with a parasitic jellyfish and then likely swam back up, as it appears to take roughly 36 hours, at least in humans, meaning there is a lag time. It would also appear that typically the creature would hold on to the prey as to keep it there in the deep sea, but it may have lost its grip by the whale being larger or the cnidarian not at full maturity, or even it's possible maybe the whales survive the process but humans can't. As such, the whale returned to the surface for air and likely entered the exclusion zone to start mating with other whales. Eventually, however, its time would be up, and within it, the young would eat one another as well as the whale before finally bursting out as one animal, which again, it is potentially possible that the whale may survive the process, but this created the cnidarian who was seen to have captured the boat. Speaking of, we see the method by which it usually infects, as it assumed the boat to be a whale. As the tendrils latch onto the side of the boat, a digestive juice appears to be released, which would on a whale dissolve the skin, allowing the creature to suction to its side, which would be imperative as deep sea pressure could create issues for the offspring's fragile body. On the boat, however, this was not able to completely digest the wood. Instead, it thinned it and allowed for a person to poke a hole in it and make an unwary sailor act up. The tendrils would then release the substance containing live young within the body, where they would grow to maturity, then at a certain point in that maturity would engage in something known as intrauterine cannibalization, which is what sharks practice as well. While not in a uterus per se, the siblings would eat one another until only one remained. This, along with whale meat, would give the new victor energy for growth and not overtax the environment with too many cnidarians, as food is scarce and competition is already likely very high. This ultimately is how this creature likely ended up in the the exclusion zone, capturing a boat. What's interesting though is, likely this is not a fully grown variant given that the boat is smaller than an average whale, and its buoyancy was able to keep it from being dragged down into the water by the creature despite its firm grasp on the ship. All of this indicates its location based on hunting patterns, the size of the creature, and its preferred prey. Now that we have an understanding of where this thing came from, the question is, why does it react to humans the way it does, and why does this creature flourish within our meat suits despite us not being the intended target? Well, it might surprise you that for once I actually do believe our immune systems appear to be enough to get the job done despite the eye exploding issue and the immediate end. So let me explain. We see that the infection process begins with cuts on the body, which means that these creatures can not only make cuts into the skin of a person, but are likely attracted to the blood of a person or animal in general. This adaptation would be clearly inspired by the parent breaking a hole into the skin of the whale and blood leaking out, letting the young know where to go, but also since whales are warm-blooded animals, that means their metabolism keeps them warm even in cold environments, so they are drawn to the warmth as well. Which humans actually have a body temperature similar to whales, as whales' internal body temperature is around 99 degrees and ours is at 98.6, which if you didn't know, that figure concerning our body temperature might actually be too high because it was conducted, or at least the experiments were conducted during a time when a lot of people had syphilis or at least a low-grade fever from something they were infected with. So 98.6 likely is too high. We should really be closer to around 98 degrees. Anyways, when Sudi was infected, likely the water he was showering in was only lukewarm because it was a fishing trawler and not a luxury cruise line. Because of this, once the parasite hit his skin, they were able to feel the temperature difference and began gnawing their way into his skin until creating large wounds and entering the body. There appears to be some sort of anticoagulant the creatures release after entering the body as well to prevent healing of wounds, potentially to make sure that after the parent releases the digestive fluid to break down the skin, the whale wouldn't be able to quickly close back up the wound with thrombocytes. This also explains why those who are infected do not heal as they should and still keep bleeding. But arguably the most alarming thing about the young parasite is its ability to gnaw through virtually anything. Nets used on them were eaten through, skin was eaten through, the whole of the boat was eaten through, concerning at least the larger one in the tank. This would imply it's probably not digestive fluid, but some form of teeth that allows it to cut through if there are enough of them, which again, getting through whale blubber and muscle would require the creature to be able to do this. But again, I still do believe the human immune system is an honest contender when dealing with this parasite based on where they begin congregating. Once a person is infected, the innate immune system is the first on the scene, as you might have guessed, which if you don't know what the innate immune system is, it is essentially the first line of defense, and you actually have two of them. The innate deals with the first invaders in the body and responds almost immediately as soon as a cut is detected and cells send distress signals. If the fight continues for longer than the innate can continue, the adaptive immune system responds in a few days once the invaders are then, or at least pieces of the invader, are brought to B cells, which will then produce antibodies, and then T cells are deployed to start wreaking havoc on pathogens. This is mega simplified, like a really simplified version, but it's essentially what happens. However, before that switch from innate to full adaptive, there is a cell that gets involved in the fight that is critical for parasite clearing. Now, typically this cell is specialized to deal with helminth and protozoa parasites and even allergy reactions due to their pro-inflammatory and destructive effects. What they do is move into where the suspected parasite is and attach to the parasite itself. Some parasites that have adapted alongside humanity have ways of dealing with our immunities and the eosinophils themselves, such as shedding their skin once too many attach or outmaneuvering the cells entirely. But should a parasite not have adapted with humans and our immune systems, it's likely they may not have an answer. The eosinophil will release granules that are highly cytotoxic that will quite literally begin breaking down the outside of the parasite, causing it to lyse and spill its functional contents, resulting in its end. Eosinophils are actually pretty metal. Now, human immunity to parasites is no way assured. In a lot of instances, parasites can ignore these cells, which is why we are not always successful in clearing parasites. But with that said, because of our coevolution, parasites to some degree may be helpful to humans, which it's also time for another side tangent. I know you guys love these. I've mentioned several times in other videos, but in case you haven't seen them, yeah, believe it or not, parasites may be good for our bodies. We know allergies are on the rise in first world countries, but the question is why? Well, a hypothesis was formed that our immune systems are overreacting to things that weren't necessarily a problem a few hundred years ago. This may be a direct result of our society overcoming parasites. In first world countries, we typically do not deal with parasites very often, and the result has been somewhat strange. From how it appears, parasites calm our immune systems. Now, that might sound strange, but it's directly related to what the parasite wants to do. A calmer immune system of the host, a less aggressive response by the host, and the parasite survives. These co-evolved parasites have been with humans for a very long time, and as a result have adapted to the intricacies of our meat suits. So if we ever want to explore space or colonize other planets, we might legitimately need to figure out a way to induce the same calming effect brought on by parasites without the parasite, or we may run into an issue of allergic reactions and like a Quarian situation where humans can't leave suits if they return to Earth for any reason. So I propose that everyone needs to eat 1 pound of dirt from Earth the first year of life. It really seems to be our only way forward. But the point of that tangent was the co-evolved statement. Parasites on land have been with us for quite some time, as well as like lakes, rivers, and bays. But a deep sea parasite, one that's a Cnidarian as well, likely has never come into contact with the human immune system, just really the whale immune system. And this is where I believe the weakness to the Cnidarian lies. Taking a look at where the parasite congregates is the best example of what's happening internally in the person. Shortly after infection with the Cnidarian, the person does display some symptoms of innate immune system being activated because it takes roughly 36 hours for the actual parasite to exit the body. So the body is quite aware of an invader and that it's present through the cellular distress signaling as a cut opens up, which would let in bacteria and the parasite, so the body is on high alert. Once the eosinophils are mobilized, they would no doubt find some of these parasites and begin attacking them. Without a proper answer, likely a lot of the Cnidarians were destroyed in the body. However, because they are able to eat through a lot of material, they then head to the one place that they aren't being attacked, and these are called immune privileged sites. Now, the reason I do think a lot of Cnidarians are destroyed in the body is because the ones that are released from the body are not near as big as the ones shown in the water tank around roughly the same amount of time. But there are several areas located all around the body that are these immune privileged sites. The central nervous system is a huge one, which is the brain. The eyes are another, as well as the testes. Eyes exploding aren't starting to sound so bad anymore, is it? These areas are rarely patrolled by the immune system because of the potential damage a full-scale response would cause, and that could damage the host in such a way that ends up ending the host. In fact, foreign antigens entering these sites typically do not even cause any response at all by the immune system. Because of this, as the parasite spreads in the body to escape the eosinophils, the one that just happens to end up in these areas are the ones who end up surviving as an attack on them ceases. So I guess parasites really are stored in the balls. Back on track, once the person is infected, these areas will allow them to survive for a time until their internal clock tells them it's time to start eating each other. Once they do, this results in them becoming violent with one another, which causes the eyes to explode at first. Well, really, it causes the retina to be destroyed at first. But because they are also in the brain of the person, this is why they very quickly meet their end shortly after they start exhibiting these extreme symptoms, as the brain is turned into what would resemble basically Swiss cheese, as these creatures begin eating and destroying not only one another, but also the tissue of the host. This change in behavior is the biggest indicator here. For some, they become delusional, such as Johnny when he wanted to go for a swim. He knew water was nearby, which may also be inspired by the parasite being in the brain. As with whales, this may inspire them to dive deep during their infection to return surviving young to the ocean floor. If that sounds weird, just remember toxoplasmosis can make mice actually walk out in the open so that either a bird of prey or a cat ends up finding them. And if you are infected with toxoplasmosis, it can make you become attracted to the smell of cat pee, which makes you want more cats and then creates the crazy cat lady down the road. So in humans, it inspires us to swim. It also could increase aggression, leading to a whale to maybe attack others and subsequently be attacked, which could injure it, causing it to sink to the floor and release the young as well. This is displayed when humans are reaching the end stages of their infection process with the swimming desire, or when Sierra ends up attacking Ciabon on the latter. I believe this Cnidarian, while completely horrifying, is only just barely able to infect humans. In fact, if we didn't have immune privileged sites, and this creature was more specifically trying to survive, say, via the bloodstream, it would get completely wrecked in the process. But because of these areas, which also fat is an immune privileged site, if you didn't know, because it's just simply difficult for immune cells to patrol it, the parasite is able to propagate until its internal clock causes it to finally enter its next stage of its life cycle, which is basically a free-for-all bloodbath of its siblings and human tissue. And this results in massive brain damage, as well as the eyes and possibly even your testicles exploding. Which, I mean, man, I'm glad that I would be clocked out at that point. But this immediate result is blindness for a few, as the retina is destroyed until the brain follows suit shortly after.